Right now, Putin is launching a coup in Moldova. Troops are being moved into Transnistria. It has begun. The Kremlin has issued an ultimatum. A secret connection with China has been revealed. A turning point is coming. The enemy's unique equipment has been reduced to dust. The Ukrainian armed forces surprised everyone with this strike. Right now, the US has decided to strike from Iran. The Ukrainian armed forces responded harshly to the strikes on Ukraine. This is shocking. And the girl surprised everyone again. All of this and more in our broadcast. Hotspot. China has practically entered the war. Sensational. Beijing has become the Kremlin's most important military ally. Terrifying facts have shocked Europe and the US. Nuclear threat. The US is preparing to strike Iran in the coming days. The world is on the brink. The Kremlin has put forward new demands, an unexpected twist. You will be shocked by the latest news. Details coming up.
Well, there you have it. The Kremlin has set conditions for a meeting between Putin, Trump, and Zelensky. Spoiler: nothing surprising. Peskov also stated that the date for the third round of negotiations will be coordinated next week.
Ukraine needs to understand the realities and accept this reality. So we hope that the work will continue and that we will move on to the third round of negotiations.
Dictatorship. It seems this is no longer just about Putin. American analysts are sounding the alarm. Donald Trump is increasingly turning the US from a democracy into an autocracy. There are more and more statements about a strong hand and less respect for independent institutions.
Yes, indeed. If we evaluate Trump's second presidential term, many of the decisions made by the White House can be seen as a certain shift toward autocracy. Here, we can recall the ban on students going on strike. And right now, there is a very obvious conflict between the president and one of the most famous universities, Harvard. The second case, which very eloquently illustrates these tendencies aimed at undermining democracy by Trump, is the events in California.
Meanwhile, the absurdity continues. The White House press secretary calls Trump the chief peacemaker and a president who establishes peace through strength. Well, yes. That's probably why the US Senate has once again postponed sanctions against Russia at least until July.
One of the co-authors of this bill, Lindsey Graham, is a senator from South Carolina, politician who is highly aligned with the White House. So it's rather hard to imagine that this initiative would have made it to the Senate without Trump's approval. It's also clear that Trump himself has not yet decided on a new strategy toward Russia. And as of today, there haven't been any significant changes.
Trump's antics don't end there. Earlier, he left the G7 summit early, supposedly because of his dislike for the French president and his lack of interest in meeting with Zelensky. And now they've even decided to shorten the NATO summit in The Hague, just so Trump doesn't get bored and leave early.
This is blatant sabotage on Trump's part and yet another confirmation of just how different his vision for the development of the international situation is from that of the European leaders. The conflict with Macron didn't arise out of nowhere, nor did Trump's constant critical statements towards the Europeans.
Meanwhile, Russia continues its peacekeeping activities. Maria Zakharova stated that Moscow is warning Washington against military intervention in the situation surrounding Iran and Israel.
In this way, Russia is trying to demonstrate its international significance, but in fact, in reality, they are severely limited and constrained resources and Putin's strategic failure, which is closely connected to the loss of control in the Middle East and other regions of the world, makes Zakharova's statement appear rather laughable to many observers. And it's obvious that the Russian side simply won't be listened to here at all.
During the St. Petersburg International Economic Forum, Putin denied rumors about a possible Russian attack on NATO countries.
This story that Russia is planning to attack Europe, NATO countries, is exactly the kind of incredible lie that they're trying to make the people of Western European countries believe. But we understand that this is nonsense. You understand those who say this, well, they don't believe it themselves.
Of course, we understand that you understand, but it's really hard to believe.
Russia, during a period of turbulence in the relationship between Europeans and America, will definitely try to carry out a certain revision of global geopolitics and will try to regain the influence over Eastern Europe that was lost after the collapse of the Soviet Union.
And in Russia, they're entertaining themselves however they can. There, the deputy speaker of the Russian State Duma announced that they are always waiting to welcome Elon Musk and are even ready to grant him asylum. The main thing is, just not in the Kursk region and not in the Wagner dormitory either.
Urgent. Moscow is preparing a coup in Moldova. The Kremlin's terrifying plan. Shock around the world. The Prime Minister of Moldova made an unexpected statement. Russia wants a new foothold on the borders of Ukraine and the EU. The Kremlin is preparing to seize the country right now. The goal is to deploy thousands of soldiers in Transnistria. Watch for the details.
The Prime Minister of Moldova stated that Russia is planning to deploy 10,000 soldiers to the unrecognized Transnistria.
They need there to be a political, how should I put it? Let me think, certainly
a crisis?
A demand, a political demand for a government that can negotiate with the Kremlin. What is this for? It's so that the government turns a blind eye to the increased military presence in the Transnistrian region. Because if they turn a blind eye, in 3 or 4 weeks, there will be 10,000 soldiers there armed to the teeth. And then, can you imagine what kind of tensions that would create in the region? And not only in the southwest of Ukraine, but also in the southeast of Romania.
Russia's goal is to destabilize the region and, with a new contingent, threaten not only Ukraine, but also intimidate other European countries with the possibility of war.
And if you add this contingent of 10,000 soldiers, then considering Moldova's rather modest military capabilities, this could really escalate into internal confrontation. Moreover, it would be an armed confrontation which the Russian Federation would traditionally call a civil war.
The Kremlin cannot simply transfer troops there, since the territory is located between Ukraine and Moldova. That's why the Russians are trying to interfere in the upcoming parliamentary elections, hoping that a more friendly government will help resolve the issue.
Russia has acted and continues to act as a guarantor of the Transnistrian settlement. By the way, regarding Moldova's energy security, we are acting strictly in accordance with all agreements, which were based on proposals from the Moldovan side.
Moldova is a parliamentary presidential republic, and even if Maia Sandu obviously remains president, but at the same time pro-Russian destructive anti-integration forces and outlets say getting a majority in parliament, this will simply block Moldova's path toward European integration.
Russia has already tried to interfere in the presidential elections in Moldova and will try again using online propaganda and illegal money transfers to parties and Moldovan voters.
We see a variety of different people, including Kremlin officials. Some of them even say that Moldova does not exist. So we hear things like this which are disrespectful. There are people who speak disrespectfully or even contemptuously about our people, about Moldova, about Moldovans.
Naturally, Russia denies any interference, and Putin has repeatedly stated that Moldova holds no interest for Russia.
Moldova is one of the poorest countries in Europe. Until very recently, it was the poorest country in Europe. Now, Ukraine has taken this place of honor. For us, this particular country, in fact, indeed holds extremely little value or significance within the CIS.
Currently, the Russian contingent in Transnistria numbers about 1,500 people. The Moldovan authorities have repeatedly called for the withdrawal of Russian troops, stating that they violate the country's sovereignty.
There are about 20 tons of artillery munitions, equipment and more there. And of course, this is a resource that constantly attracts the Russian Federation to reinforce this area with personnel. And as for weapons, well, let's say, yes, there's no need to transfer them there, they're already there. That's why, of course, Moldova again needs to pay attention to these depots and, let's say, not forget that this is a magnet that will constantly attract the Russian Federation.
The entire policy of modern Russia is definitely not a move toward peace. After all, through all their actions, the Russians show that they are ready to attack anyone they can reach.
Shock! Total defeat of the Russians. The Saint-Epiok has been completely destroyed. Footage that makes the Kremlin tremble. Trump is preparing the world for Armageddon, a war on two fronts, Iran and Ukraine. These are not just rumors. The White House is preparing a terrifying sensation. Is Putin really fleeing from Sumy region? We will show the truth about what is happening at the front. Details, figures, and footage right now.
The countries on NATO's eastern flank are preparing for war. Underground operating rooms, satellite communications, and medical mobilization. While part of Europe is hoping for peace, the countries on NATO's eastern flank are acting as if war is not a question of if but when. After Russia's invasion of Ukraine, the illusion of security in Europe has crumbled. Hospitals are no longer just medical facilities, they are becoming fortified nodes of national defense. Estonia, Lithuania, Latvia, and Poland are revising their crisis response protocols, reinforcing hospitals, investing in body armor for medical personnel, underground infrastructure, autonomous power systems, and satellite communications. Many clinics are already learning to operate under conditions where there are simultaneous bombings, mass casualties, and power outages. Hospitals are the new frontline. Modern conflicts no longer spare civilian infrastructure. Ukraine has already gone through this, and its experience has become a benchmark for Eastern Europe. At Vilnius University Hospital, shelters, helicopter pads, and autonomous life support systems are being developed. Similar transformations are taking place in other countries as well. Basements are being repurposed into operating rooms, and mobile hospitals and generators are being purchased. In Estonia, backup internet connections are being created and satellite phones are being distributed in case of communication outages. Poland has initiated discussions on medical security in wartime conditions within the EU Council. Medical preparedness is now seen as a part of defense, on par with energy or military logistics. There is a shortage of resources and personnel, but not everything can be solved by technology. A severe shortage of staff remains a problem. In the Baltic countries, the number of doctors and nurses per capita is several times lower than, for example, in Germany. At the same time, not everyone is willing to stay in place in the event of an invasion. In Lithuania, a survey showed that a quarter of medical workers would most likely leave, and a third are undecided. Similar figures are expected in Estonia. Some are already being asked to sign documents confirming their readiness to work under martial law. Others are demanding clarity. Should they be preparing for an influx of civilian patients or for field medicine involving amputations and shrapnel wounds? These are two different realities, and both are real in the context of modern warfare. In Lithuania, exercises are being conducted with the army, including evacuation drills and simulations of receiving the wounded. Young doctors are undergoing trauma training focused on combat situations. Some medical professionals volunteer in Ukraine to gain real experience after drone attacks, cluster munitions, and heavy shelling. Doctors returning from the front line say that no one in any peaceful country has ever seen injuries of this magnitude. We're talking about patients without limbs, with severe burns, traumatic brain injuries, and spinal injuries. In peaceful Lithuania or Latvia, amputations used to happen once a year. In Ukraine, there are entire wards filled with people who have lost arms and legs. But even the most well-protected hospitals cannot function without supplies, medications, oxygen tourniquets, and donor blood. Estonia has allocated 25 million euros for emergency kits. Since the COVID era, Latvia has maintained a 3-month supply of medications, but in the event of war, those reserves would be depleted quickly. The EU is urging the creation of centralized distribution mechanisms, especially for small countries that lack sufficient storage and transportation. According to experts' estimates, military needs may require 3 to 5 times more intensive care beds than are currently available. Most hospitals would not be able to sustain even 150% of their usual intake for more than 48 hours. Blood and oxygen are also at risk. And if the frontline comes, who will take in the people? The reality is this: with the modern nature of warfare, the frontline is only nominal. Missiles, drones, and strikes on infrastructure, all of these could hit not only border cities, but also the heart of Europe. Countries farther from the borders must prepare to receive the wounded and refugees. The European Union is urging everyone to prepare in advance for who will take responsibility and how if one of the Baltic countries is occupied. Who will take in Lithuanian patients if Lithuania no longer exists? Who will provide evacuation and treatment if there are thousands of wounded within 2 weeks? Medicine as defense. While Brussels debates sovereignty and budgets, the eastern flank is building underground hospitals. Medical professionals are training, students are taking military medicine courses, and supplies are being stockpiled, not because they want war, but because they understand war is not hypothetical, it is the reality of their neighbors. As they say in Vilnius, we are in the same boat as Europe, but our part of the boat is already in icy water. Meanwhile, China is no longer hiding. The drones attacking Ukraine contain more and more Chinese components. Beijing is increasingly revealing itself not as a neutral party, but as one of Moscow's hidden yet key allies in the war against Ukraine. If previously China tried to maintain the image of a bystander, avoiding direct supplies of military products, now that mask is slipping. on the wreckage of drones shot down over Ukraine, Chinese parts are increasingly being found: antennas, circuit boards, engines and navigation components. And this concerns not only kamikaze or FPV drones, but also heavier unmanned aerial vehicles that Russia uses for systematic attacks on Ukrainian cities. Just a year ago, these UAVs were mostly equipped with Western-made parts that had reached Russia through grey market schemes. Today, however, Chinese counterparts are increasingly taking their place. Western intelligence agencies report that China is supplying Russia with critically important electronics, optics and civilian drones that can be easily adapted for military purposes. In addition, there is evidence of small but regular shipments of munitions and military-grade drones. This is confirmed by the analysis of debris, as well as satellite data tracking logistical routes from China to Russia and Belarus. Officially, China is not participating in the war, but de facto it has become part of the military supply chain fueling Russian aggression. There are more and more signs indicating that Beijing is actively advising Moscow and that Chinese specialists may be present at Russian defense enterprises. In fact, China has crossed the line. From a neutral partner, it is turning into a full-fledged technological accomplice. A Silence of the Lambs style lunch. How Russians are dealing with supply shortages. In another conversation intercepted by Ukrainian intelligence, a real horror detective story unfolded among the Russian occupiers. Servicemen of the main intelligence directorate of Ukraine revealed a dialogue in which Russian soldiers talked about how they considered one of their comrades missing in action, but it turned out that his fellow soldier had simply eaten him. That's all for today. You can catch more news tomorrow.
Since the beginning of the day, there have already been 88 battles on the front line. The General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine notes that most of the Russian assaults are taking place in the Pokrovsk direction.
For the most part, they are using infantry supported by drones, aviation, glide bombs, and so on. They really are trying to save their equipment. Wherever they send their equipment forward, it is instantly destroyed by our drones. That's why they use infantry, trying to break through and advance by sheer numbers.
In the Lyman sector, Ukrainian forces successfully repelled Russian assaults near Kharkivka in the Luhansk region, as well as near Rytkodub and Karpivka in the Donetsk region. The enemy also tried to advance in the area of Novy Mir, Hlushchenkove and Vovchansk in the Kharkiv region. In this region, the Russians are actively using sabotage groups and drones. The main goal is to divert defense forces from the more active sectors of the front, the military says.
We are observing constant engineering and fortification work along the line of contact. We see idiocy on the part of the Russians in the sense that they know we can see them, that we can inflict fire damage, but at the same time, they do not always conceal their actions. As for us, we make decisions and deliver fire strikes. We have already managed to neutralize a self-propelled artillery unit, damage a tank, and hit many fuel and lubricant depots. The Russians have suffered losses in manpower, communication antennas, mortars, and a great many vehicles, which we have stopped counting. If we talk about numbers, in just a month and a half of work, the Strix battalion alone has destroyed Russian equipment worth roughly $10 million. Call sign Kimik, head of the Border Service Department of the Kharkiv Border Detachment, speaking on the United News Marathon.
Military experts know that the Russians still have some outdated equipment in their warehouses, but restoring it takes a long time.
Everything that is more or less suitable for use has already been taken out of storage by the Russians, sent to repair plants, restored, and sent to the battlefield, where it was promptly destroyed. The use of armored vehicles on the battlefield is not particularly effective. It is bulky, not very fast, not maneuverable, and under such conditions, it is highly vulnerable both to artillery and to FPV drone operators. The enemy is increasingly resorting to the tactic of using either modified civilian vehicles or motorcycles. Vladislav Seleznev, military expert on Radio NV.
The Russians are using motorcycle assaults in the Siversk direction, according to the military.
The Russians are actively using motorcycles from 4 to 15 at a time with 2 soldiers on each. This makes them harder to hit. A motorcycle moves faster and is more difficult to hit with artillery. Their goal is to bypass our first positions and gain a foothold deeper in. But we destroy them either on the approach or already during the attack. For Russian officers, the main thing is progress on the map. They stuff the equipment with people, sending them to certain death. The same thing is happening with motorcycles. Only now the cannon fodder moves faster. Andriy Ochanash, commander of the UAV crew of the 4th Operational Brigade Rubezh of the National Guard of Ukraine, live on the United News Marathon.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine today. Join us now. Shock! Russia attacks Ukraine with a swarm of death, but the Ukrainian armed forces already have a response ready. He killed and ate for 2 weeks. The main intelligence directorate has released horrifying evidence of cannibalism among the occupiers. An intercepted conversation is truly terrifying. Meanwhile, the offensive on Sumy has stalled, but the enemy is plotting something terrible. But what exactly? Find out in our report.
Russia will continue to strike Ukrainian cities hard and with precision until June 25th. The Center for Countering Disinformation also warns that the aggressor is planning to attack our cities with swarms of drones. In the past 24 hours, the enemy has engaged in 176 combat clashes along the front, 52 of which Ukrainian defenders repelled in the Pokrovsk direction.
In the Pokrovsk direction, the enemy is trying to expand its presence in the area of the Malinovka junction. This poses a threat of creating an operational encirclement. Accordingly, in the Pokrovsk direction, this means advancing toward the cities of the Pokrovsk agglomeration, Dobropilya, Mirnorad, and the main threat is reaching the administrative borders of the Dnipropetrovsk region.
But the main flank and axis of advance for the occupying forces right now is moving along the Pokrovsk-Kostiantynivka highway with the threat of reaching Kostiantynivka itself.
The Pokrovsk-Kostiantynivka highway is a key logistical component for Ukraine's defense forces. At the moment, heavy fighting is taking place in the Pokrovsk direction in the areas of the settlements of Kotlin and Yudakhne. These settlements also represent an economic component of the Russian operation in the Pokrovsk direction.
Specifically, these settlements are sites of coking coal deposits, which makes them even more attractive to the Russians for financial gain. Another target the occupiers are dreaming of reaching is the border of the Dnipropetrovsk region. However, reaching it is no longer a financial matter for the Russians, but rather about satisfying their own vanity.
Their information policy, accordingly, is to present the successes of the Russian occupation forces as tactical achievements and as the fulfillment of the so-called first point of the special military operation, that is, taking control of the territory of the Donetsk region.
According to the Deep State project, the only point in the Luhansk region that was recently held by the Ukrainian armed forces is now in the red zone, meaning under the control of the occupiers.
After tactical successes in the Bilohorivka area, the situation has become very difficult for the units of the Ukrainian defense forces concentrated in the Serebryansk forestry. Therefore, going forward, the occupiers will try to expand their area of presence in order to threaten the creation of an operational encirclement of the Ukrainian defense forces units both in the Seversk area and, accordingly, in the Serebryansk forestry area.
The assaults along the entire front line are resulting in enormous losses for the occupiers. Just in the past day, Ukrainian defenders have eliminated more than 1,000 enemy troops. And as for those whom the Ukrainians didn't eliminate, they were eaten by their own comrades, and that's according to the Russians themselves.
So, here's the thing. Brelok ate former android in the mouth. No one is going anywhere. Brelok killed him and then ate him for 2 weeks. Over.
While Russians are being killed and eaten in the war against Ukraine, the Russian couple is drowning in garbage. The waste removal company is complaining about a shortage of staff since all the garbage truck drivers have gone off to fight in the war. And apparently the gaps aren't just in this company. If North Korea is planning to send 25,000 of its workers to assemble drones in Russia, another 6,000 sappers and military engineers will be brought from there as well, following the meeting between Sergei Shoigu and the Korean dictator Kim Jong-un. A significant breakthrough in military affairs for Ukrainians could be the testing of new means to counter Russian KABs and FABs. Some media outlets report that these systems also affect Shaheds. Ukraine, together with NATO, conducted equipment testing as part of the NATO Innovation Challenge project. And by the end of 2025, the partial deployment of a new multi-layered air defense system is expected.
Shock! Russia's air defense has collapsed. A complete failure. Russian air defense can't cope. The Kremlin has effectively admitted its own powerlessness. They are no longer able to protect their own aircraft because the Ukrainian armed forces strike unexpectedly and powerfully. Now the remaining aircraft are being urgently relocated farther away from Ukrainian drones and missiles. But will that help them? All the details right now.
I'm not a coward, but I am afraid. While Kremlin propaganda desperately tries to convince the world that the Ukrainian drone attacks on Russian airfields have not caused significant damage to Putin's nuclear triad and Russia's strategic aviation, in reality, the Kremlin is frantically trying to hide the remnants of its strategic aviation as securely as possible. After the brilliant special operation by the SBU, Russia relocated its most valuable military aircraft farther from Ukraine to Kamchatka, Chukotka, and the Amur region.
Putin demanded that the planes be hidden, That scarecrow popped up and demanded that bases and airfields be prepared in advance for new weapon systems so that, I quote, they aren't placed in the middle of an open field. By the way, what exactly is he planning to prepare these new airfields for? Don't you know? Given the burned aircraft part of that nuclear triad, the air component after Operation Web, pretty soon they'll be able to fit all of them neatly on a single airfield.
And that's not just a figure of speech. In reality, Putin has barely any strategic aviation left that is actually capable of taking to the skies. According to the Telegraph, the Russians have relocated at least 2 such Tu-160 strategic bomber missile carriers 6,500 kilometers away from the front line. They were transferred to the remote Anadyr base. To understand just how remote and isolated this place is, it's enough to know that you can only get there by air or by sea, as satellite images show. The Kremlin's new old strategic airfield is located on the uninhabited Chukotka Peninsula, about 660 kilometers from Alaska. It was built back in the Cold War era to protect the USSR from potential attacks by the United States of America. Now the SBU Tu-S and MiGs that were not finished off are hiding there from Ukrainian drones.
So it turns out that Ukraine, after hearing this statement from Putin, should hide its planes, hide in the fields, and hide the tanks that are left. In other words, Ukraine has forced Russia to seriously prepare for war across its entire territory.
However, it's not a given that such precautions by Putin will save Russia's strategic aviation. On the contrary, they might backfire on the battered Tu aircraft. Most of the Kremlin's aircraft fleet is over 40 years old. The service life of these metal birds has long been running out. Due to the lack of modernization and proper maintenance, every flight, especially from a remote airfield, could potentially be the last for the Kremlin's strategic bombers. It is simply impossible to carry out technical maintenance on the Tu-160 in the backwaters of Russia. In the end, no matter how much the Kremlin strategic aviation tries to hide in crevices and remote bases, sooner or later it will have to return to the zone of direct fire from the Ukrainian armed forces.
Well, let's put it this way. The possibilities for ongoing repairs and routine maintenance at the main airfields have already been exhausted. A major overhaul is required. All Russian aircraft repair plants for this type of aircraft are located in Diaghilevo, which has already been hit, and in Taganrog, which is even closer to the front line than Diaghilevo. That's all. Only 2 plants are capable of repairing this type of aircraft. If the Russians send them in for repairs, well, most likely with the appearance of our missiles, among other things, they will have to say goodbye to these aircraft right there. If they send them in for repairs, just 2 missiles would be enough to dispel any doubts the Russians might have about the possibility of repairing aircraft there.
A new, modern airfield with all the necessary infrastructure could solve this issue. It was precisely such an airfield that Putin gave orders to build. But all of this is just talk. In reality, no one is going to build any military base. There is not the slightest point in it. After all, Ukraine could turn it into a pile of twisted concrete at any moment.
Naturally, Putin understands perfectly well that no new airfield for new weapon systems will be built. But of course, the order has to be given on camera. He says, new bases are super powerful, super wonderful ones with modern weapons, please. Make sure to build them with proper protection.
In the end, experts tend to agree that the active redeployment of Russian strategic aviation is nothing more than pointless maneuvers for domestic consumption. In this way, Putin is trying to reassure himself and the Russian people who were shocked by the brilliant attack of Ukrainian drones on the airfields. In practice, however, the Russian Air Force suffers much more from this decision than from Ukrainian drones. They are wearing out the already extremely limited engine life of their equipment. It will become much more difficult and costly for the Russian army to carry out massive airstrikes from such a distance. And if we recall the Kremlin Air Force's tendency for unauthorized jettisoning of munitions from under the wing, it's quite possible that the lion's share of Russian missiles will end up falling somewhere between Moscow and Chukotka.
Urgent! The Kremlin has made a shocking statement. Kyiv must surrender. Meanwhile, Ukraine's security guarantor Trump has simply disappeared from the radar of the peace process, about which he was loudly shouting on every corner not so long ago. Where did these promises go? New details on how the peace process is progressing right now.
Peace in Ukraine has not come any closer, despite Trump and Putin talking on the phone for 2 hours. Amid these events, the Russian Federation has come up with an additional absurd demand. Supposedly, Ukraine must destroy all the weapons in the country that were provided by its Western allies.
Naturally, all these surpluses must be destroyed. All international procedures are well known. The armaments must be reduced and disposed of, and this must be guaranteed.
Propagandists believe that the issue of destroying Western weapons could be raised as early as the third round of negotiations between the Ukrainian and Russian delegations. The US is in no hurry to punish Russia, even as it carries out yet another massive strike on Kyiv. At a press conference on the sidelines of the G7 leaders summit in Canada, Donald Trump stated that he is not imposing sanctions on Russia because he is waiting for a peace agreement to be signed.
I'm waiting to see if an agreement will be signed. When I impose sanctions on the country, it costs the US a lot of money. Huge amounts. It's not just about signing a document. We're talking about billions and billions of dollars. Sanctions are not that simple. It's not a one-way street.
Trump suggested that he would not impose further sanctions on Russia, since the Europeans should be the first to do so.
If in the coming weeks the Europeans and Americans jointly impose these sanctions, the situation will really change, because the ability of the Russian economy to withstand them will be called into question.
At the G7 summit, Trump announced an early end to his visit, so the meeting with Zelensky, which both the Ukrainian and American sides had been preparing for, did not take place. According to Putin's aides, in a phone conversation with the US president, he mentioned negotiations with Ukraine.
The Russian side expressed its readiness to continue negotiations with the Ukrainians tentatively after July 22. Donald Trump took note of this information and once again emphasized his interest in a swift end to the Russian-Ukrainian conflict.
In this conversation, according to Ushakov, Putin offered Russia's assistance in negotiations for a peaceful resolution of the escalation between Iran and Israel. With this, Putin is likely trying to divert attention from Russia's war against Ukraine by offering to mediate in the Middle East situation, according to a report by the American Institute for the Study of War.
Putin continues to portray Russia as an effective and indispensable international partner for the United States amid the ongoing tense relations between Iran and Israel.
Later, Putin's press secretary Peskov told Russian propagandists that the exact date of a possible round of negotiations has not yet been determined, but most likely Istanbul will once again serve as the venue.
So far, there has been no talk of choosing any other venue. That's the first point. Indeed, such a time frame was mentioned. There's no exact date for the continuation yet.
It has become known that Austria is ready to provide proper mediation for meetings between the Ukrainian delegation and representatives of the aggressor country, the Russian Federation.
Of course, today we also spoke about the need to support all joint efforts for the sake of peace. We appreciate Austria's willingness to provide proper mediation for meetings with the Russian side.
50 senators from the Republican and Democratic parties in the United States have proposed a bill that would impose sanctions on Russia if it refuses to negotiate with Ukraine. U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio asked lawmakers to give the president space and time to negotiate. Senator Lindsey Graham stated that he wants Ukraine to survive when the war is over.
President Trump tried to resolve everything through diplomacy. Last night I told him, "You made great efforts to bring Putin to the negotiating table. I think he is playing with you and with the whole world. It's time to change the game." I spoke with him. Look, if we don't have breakthroughs in the negotiations, the Senate will approve sanctions against Russia.
That's all for now. For more breaking news from the front, tune in to our next episode.